Hello and welcome to the channel. This video focuses on fitting the MONORIM rear suspension to an AOVO Pro ES80. Thank you so much to MONORIM for partnering with me for this video, and as always, please do me a huge favour and please do subscribe to the channel. So let's start with the unboxing of the MONORIM rear suspension, and this is for the AOVO Pro ES80, and the colour in this instance is black and red. So unboxing this rear suspension for the first time, you will see inside the package a card with a QR code on it, which will give you some basic instructions. The rear mudguard is slotted into the side of the foam packaging, and when you lift the top of the foam packaging off, you will see the already constructed rear suspension, and this will need to be taken apart for fitting, but you can get a good idea of what the whole unit looks like prior to disassembly. Now, there are a lot of parts included here, some of which, if you're fitting this to an AOVO Pro ES80, you will not use. This must be available for a range of scooters, so there are some additional parts, and you just need to be aware that when you get to the end of fitting this, there will be some parts that you don't use. That's not to be worried about. One of these instances is these decals here. Didn't use them, didn't really know what they were for, but they certainly weren't required as part of the setup for this scooter. So let's have a look inside the big bag that comes with the rear suspension. Now, this has got quite a range of parts in it, just emptying it out onto the table there. So just checking there's nothing else in there. Yeah, there's just one more part. So there is a range of tools that you will need, some decals, a set of fitting plates. This is a replacement brake cable, a stronger spring. These are the caps, a couple of cable ties, some parts that are required for the brake but not on the AOVO Pro, an extension for the light. This is a step drill bit which you'll see used later on in the video. A spare bell, not required for the AOVO Pro, but it's in there, and again, some more decals, nice to have. So let's move on now to fitting the MONORIM rear suspension. I start here by removing the soft sort of rubber grey mudguard bolt covers and the bolts using a Phillips screwdriver. I'd only got two of the rubber covers. One of those had got lost prior to the fitting of this. Next, carefully remove the rear decals, particularly if you want to use them again on another scooter. These parts aren't required for the installation of the rear suspension, but it's always helpful to have a spare set of decals. So next task here is to remove the wheel bolt covers, just a couple of small bolts on each size using an Allen key. I believe that's 2.5mm. And it's exactly the same task on each side of the scooter, and it's just 2 bolts. Easily removed, no problems here. The next task is to dismantle the rear brake. So there is one bolt that clamps onto the brake cable itself, so you can see that comes loose as I undo the rear brake. The brake will just slot out the side, you don't need to remove that bolt altogether. And then there are two further bolts that you need to remove to dismantle the rear brake caliper completely. Carefully remove the bolts without trying to drop them. You can see the hole in the caliper itself is much bigger than required, and that's for adjustment of the brakes, which you'll see later on in this video. And that's the caliper removed. Quite a simple task, this one. You can't fully remove it because there's a ferrule at the end of the cable, so I do have some brake cable snips, so quite easily removed. That'll come in handy later. Now the AOVO Pro ES80 is a more advanced model in that the mudguard has got some stabilising supports. I've got an AOVO Pro that came out much earlier than that, which has no support, so the rear mudguard moves around quite a bit, so they upgraded the design with these rear bolts, so rear bolts holding the AOVO Pro's mudguard in place. Now inside the mudguard there is glue holding the brake cable in place. Now the best way to do this is just to pick at the glue. It's black and it's really quite sticky. Now we'll need this later on again to put the brake cable back in place, so if you do pick bits off, don't lose them, just keep that gathered in one place, because we'll use a heat gun later to put the cable back into the new mudguard. Quite fiddly to do this, but it's worth taking your time, and definitely worth persevering so you don't damage the cable. And as you can see there, what you've got left is a couple of bolts that need removing, or screws in fact, to the rear light. Again, a small Phillips screwdriver, and that frees up the light. Now you still can't remove the light because there is a connector holding the cable together. This is simply unplugged, and then you can move on to remove the rear wheel. There are just two bolts holding the rear wheel in place, so same task each side. Remove the bolts with an Allen key, and you'll find that this quite easily slides out of two guides that hold the wheel in place. Now when you do this, the front of the scooter becomes unbalanced, so just be aware that if you've got it set up like I have, the scooter will become unbalanced, and you can see there what the guides look like. So on to the fun part. This is the fitting now of the actual suspension itself. So just carefully remove the plastic cover and the lower shock bolt that needs to be fitted to the deck. You'll see that happen shortly. Now I've got an electric screwdriver here with an Allen key, the one that's most commonly used across all of the different parts here, so that just speeds things along really nicely. So I would really suggest, if you've got one of these, to get that right fitting Allen key, and you will have no problem at all. It will really speed your fitting altogether. So that's the shock removed, just keeping all these parts really carefully together so nothing drops on the floor and gets lost. And then this gives you the opportunity to remove one further bolt, and that is the left and right parts of the suspension dismantled. Now, there are two shock springs provided. They're both marked up with the same numbers, so looking at the springs themselves, one is a much denser coil, that's the spare. The 30 to 45, the red one there, is a lighter spring. You can see looking at them side by side here. I'm a heavier rider, so I've gone with the green spring, that denser spring. With the front suspension, I also used the denser spring as well, which was marked up as strong, which you may have seen in my front suspension video. So they're both essentially matching for heavier riders. Just lining up the MONORIM logo at the front there, and that's going to be ready to be fitted. Now, this is quite a complex part here, so I'll try and explain it as carefully as I can. There are mounting plates that are already fitted to the suspension, so these need to be removed, and then there are two parts to each of the mounting plates for each side of the scooter. That'll make sense as you see more of this video. So remove those two mounting plates. I'll consistently call them mounting plates so you know what they are. They're marked up as left and right, and each mounting plate has got these small screws again, so they need to be removed. So essentially you'll end up with 4 parts, 2 parts for the left, 2 parts for the right of a mounting plate that is marked up as left and right. Exactly the same task for the right hand side here, and although they look the same, they are different, and I'll explain why in a second. Now, with the pack, there is a set of mounting plates in this packet called Pro. Now, they're too big for the AOVO Pro, so discard those, you won't need them. Use the original mounting plates that were already fitted to the suspension. They are absolutely a perfect fit for this scooter. Now, when we took the suspension apart, there was a plate that fits to the deck board, 3 screws that need applying with an Allen key. Now, this is what holds the suspension onto the scooter deck, so it's really important that you give these a really good tighten. Make sure that they're absolutely secure. And this is the bolts that came from the shock mount at the bottom there, so I'm just putting that back in place. So I'm going to do some work here to connect the rear light to the mudguard. So in terms of reapplying it, it goes in horizontally rather than vertically, and you use the original screws to mount the light back again. Now, I found that these screws were just slightly too long, so what I was able to do was find a small piece of rubber that's used on brake cables to mount them to handlebars of bikes, and just made a small gasket there, as you can see, and that meant that the screws became the perfect length and there was no rattling around of the light. Now connect the cables back together, and there are two things that I think is important to do here. Just switch the scooter on and the light on, and that means you can check whether the light is working in the normal mode, and then just pull the brake lever and you can see whether the brake is working. Now I've got plenty of heat shrink knocking around, so just in terms of making sure that all of the cables to the rear light are really well protected, I've used 2 pieces of heat shrink here. So using a heat gun, you can use a lighter of course, but if you've got a heat gun you get a really good fitting and good fix, you know, for it to both of the pieces of heat shrink. And that should give you a really nice bond, and it will protect those connectors. Now, I mentioned earlier about keeping that glue. This is a bit of a fiddly task. And again, using the heat gun, just melting some of that black, already removed piece of glue from the other mudguard. And it really is messy, quite a sticky, sort of black, tarry substance. Put one piece down, let it cool a bit, and then move on to the next, and eventually you can really tidy this glue up and do a decent job, but it is quite fiddly. As you can see, it kind of blows away when you're trying to use a heat gun, but you can see there, just apply it on, let it cool, be patient. I'm not being particularly patient here with it. One more piece, and then you'll end up with, you know, the finished article like that. You won't see it, it's completely hidden. This is a really interesting part of the fitting. This is drilling out the frame. It feels pretty brutal, but there is a supplied step drill bit. The holes that are nearest to the deck board are the ones that need drilling out, and you use the whole of the step drill bit right the way through to the end of the bit itself. Lots of iron filings are coming out of the drilling process, so just be really careful here and don't get any in your eyes. Probably worth wearing goggles. Exactly the same task on the other side of the scooter. Again, you can see there that there are lots of filings coming out from drilling out the frame, so just take care. And that's both holes drilled out, ready for the next task, which is the fitting of the mounting plates. Now, each mounting plate is asymmetrical. There is a thin part and a thick part, as you can see here. Thin part has to go at the bottom on both sides. So the outside mounting plate, which is the T-shaped section, goes on the outside, the rectangular section on the inside, and the original screws that hold those two pieces together are then used to go through the frame, and those will provide the pivot points for the rear suspension shortly. Again, give those bolts a really good tighten. You won't be able to access them again when the whole of the suspension is in place. Again, exactly the same the other side. you can see the left and right are marked up. So it's just a case of adding the T-shaped section again to the outside, the rectangular section to the inside. The small bolts go through the existing holes in the frame, and again, give these a really good tighten. You won't be able to access these bolts once all of the suspension is in place. Both of those bolts have bitten really nicely. So this is the point where the suspension is actually mounted to the frame itself. There are a couple of bolts either side of this main pivot point that go through the section that's just been drilled out. And exactly the same on the other side. Leave these quite loose for now. Don't put the bolts in all the way through at this stage. Just leave them quite loose. The main reason is because the mudguard, as you can see here, fits into slots inside the frame, so it holds it in place. You wouldn't be able to fit the mudguard if the bolts had already been tightened up too much. So just leave everything loose for now, and that'll give you the opportunity to fit the mudguard. Once you've done that, you can begin to start to tighten up these inner and outer bolts on the frame where you've drilled through on those mounting plates. Once again, give these a really good tighten. It's going to be very difficult to access these once the wheel's fitted. It'll be a case of dismantling the whole thing if you haven't tightened up these properly. So exactly the same on the right hand side, give that bolt a really good tighten. So getting towards the end of this fitting now. This is starting to look like the finished article when the shock itself is fitted. So using those bolts that were put to one side slightly earlier in the video, it's a case of mounting those through the frame, leaving everything just loose just for now. And then everything can be tightened right the way through the whole of the section because the mudguard is in place. So as you can see there, the electric screwdriver just comes in so handy. One further bolt. So I'm calling these in this video the through bolts, the ones that go all the way through the whole of the suspension. And we move on next to removing the existing brake cable. Because the whole of the scooter mechanism for the new suspension is moved back, there is a requirement to have a longer brake cable, which, as you'd have seen in the unboxing, is supplied. So quite a simple task this, just remove the old brake cable inner and the outer remains in place. You can see there's a red ferrule and a new brake cable that come already packaged. Just push the new brake cable all the way down the outer and you'll see that pop out the other end of the outer near the rear wheel. So this just needs fitting back into the brake caliper. If you line up the adjustment screws, there is a continuous line where that just drops in, as you'll see in a second. Just worth taking taking your time to get this correctly in place. What I tend to do is give the rear cable at the caliper end like a really good pull with a pair of pliers, and that just gets everything in place. And really importantly here, underneath the suspension there is a hole for the cable to come through. Make sure that that's guided through, and then add the extension. You can return the wheel into the guides of the suspension and give those a really good tighten. Make sure that wheel is spinning nice and freely and also symmetrically. Now there's a couple of bolts that are provided. They're too long for the brake caliper, so I used another couple of bolts that I'd already got. The ones that fit perfectly are those that are from a bottle cage on any normal bike. So I've let MONORIM know that they're going to adjust the parts to make sure for the AOVO Pro ES80 that the right bolts are provided in the future, but it's worth knowing that in advance. As you can see here, just guiding the new extended brake cable outer into the holes, the inner going through those smaller holes and into the caliper itself, and just adjusting the brake there to make sure that as the lever is pulled, the wheel stops spinning. You can adjust this further later on. It doesn't matter too much getting this right exactly, but just for the time being, just getting the wheel to stop. You would only need to do some sort of micro adjustments eventually to make sure that you've got a really good bite on that brake disc. This is the caliper bolts being tightened. So just to adjust the brake, pull the brake on and then tighten the caliper bolts. Of course, again, because I've got these snips, it's a nice neat cut, and adding the ferrule is quite a simple task, just with a pair of side cutters just to pinch that ferrule onto the new brake cable. And we're nearing completion here. There are 4 covers for the holes where the bolts go into the wheel and mount onto the frame at that pivot point. Just give those a really good bang. There are 2 pins either side of the mount points. And that is the finished suspension fitted to the AOVO Pro ES80. And the last part of this video is just a short test of this MONORIM rear suspension around the streets near to where I live. As you can see here, the MONORIM rear suspension is incredibly active on even just kind of small bumps in the road, some of these speed bumps here. The active part of the suspension is the top part. Now this scooter has now got front and rear suspension. Incredibly smooth, transformational in fact from the original AOVO Pro. Moving along here at around 19 miles per hour. and the suspension just really soaks up some of those sort of small curbs and drop-offs, almost like they're not there.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful, and once again thank you so much to MONORIM for partnering with me for this video, fitting the rear suspension to the AOVO Pro ES80. As always, please like, please do subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.